We're going to give you guys an in-depth review of the most advanced power system that we're doing right now, which is a Victron 600 amp hour full lithium and integrated system with the Victron remote management. So it just showed up. Go ahead and bring it in, Josh. All right, Christmas morning. Today, we are going to give you guys an in-depth review of the most advanced power system that we're doing in Sprinter vans right now. Let's get into the specific details of what each of these components in the system does. All of the components are laid out here. We'll start with solar. This is the solar panel. I'm sure you know exactly what this is. This is a small one, so we're just using it as an example. Solar panels go on the roof. Solar panels actually are most efficient in cooler weather. So as it gets hotter, your solar panel actually drops in efficiency. So that's just something to keep in mind if you're looking at the charge you're getting from your solar panels, and you used to get 10 amps and now you're only getting 9. Just if the weather is warm, that might be the reason why. And in order to manage the charge from the solar panel, you will want to use a solar charge controller. And this is the Victron MPPT charge controller, and this one handles 30 amps. So you can do up to 400 watts of solar. With this unit, it's also available in 50 amps as well. One important thing to note is if you're using lithium batteries, you really want to use an MPPT charge controller. That just stands for maximum power point tracking. And the long and short of it is that you will get more efficient charging, especially in cloudier conditions and with lithium batteries, which need a bit of a higher voltage when they're being charged towards their higher capacity. The next component of the system is the battery, of course. This is a 200 amp hour lithium iron phosphate battery from Victron. It is a smart battery, so with these data cables, you're actually able to kind of see inside the battery and monitor the cells and do different things like that. This is actually a very small and light battery for 200 amp hours. Another reason why we love the Victron batteries is because per amp hour, they're actually come in a very small package. So this particular build, we're going to use 3 of these 200 amp hour batteries, so we'll have a total of 600 amp hours in the van. The next piece of equipment is the BMS, the battery management system. The Victron BMS actually integrates the charging from your alternator into the BMS as well. So when you're trying to get power from your alternator, there needs to be a device in between the alternator and the batteries to make sure that the lithium batteries are not pulling too hard on the alternator. So the BMS here actually is a current limiter. It limits the current coming from the alternator to about 30 amps, and then you won't tax your alternator and burn it out too quickly. Lithium batteries are known to pull energy really quickly when they're charging, and that could be a problem. So don't hook up your alternator directly to the battery, and don't use cheaper battery chargers. You want to have something that's high quality like this that really understands what its job is and does it properly. Something that the BMS does is it manages the battery cells. It keeps them healthy. It will cut off power if it senses high voltage, low voltage, high temperatures, or a short. Basically, this device is going to keep the batteries from getting damaged so that you'll get a long life out of them. This is the Lynx distributor, and what this is basically a DC distribution panel for all of the power uses that you're going to have downstream of the batteries. So you hook this up to the batteries, and you have 4 individual fuse terminals in here, both positive and negative. So you can hook up 4 different uses off of this one Lynx distributor. And the nice thing about it is that it has little indicator lights, so if one of your fuses blows, it will actually illuminate this little LED, so you don't have to go digging around for the problem. It will be plainly obvious what's going on. Right here we have a smart shunt. This is a piece of equipment most people have probably never seen before if you don't use or if you don't build battery systems like this. The smart shunt is reading the current that is flowing in and out of the batteries. So if you want to know how much power you're using, really this is the only way to tell it. You need to have a device like this hooked up to the negative terminal of the battery, And so when power is coming in, you're able to read that on the display. And when power is going out, you can also understand exactly how much power each of your devices is using via the smart shunt. This is the 3000 watt Victron inverter charger. So this is going to provide your AC power inside the van. Since it's a charger, you're also able to charge via shore power through this device. So let's take a look at the shore power. This is a 30 amp shore power connection. This is pretty standard for what we put on a van. This connects directly to the inverter. So when you plug into here, the inverter takes the AC power and converts it to DC power and charges the batteries. The Victron inverter is a true sine wave inverter, so the type of power that you get from inverter does matter, and some devices don't like to work properly or charge properly off of inverters that don't put out a true sine wave. So if you had the question, is it? Yes, it is. Now let's get into the last two pieces of equipment that really make this system high tech. This is the Serbo GX, and you can think of this as the brains and communication center of the entire system. So there's a bunch of ports on here on the top and the bottom, and all of these pieces of equipment, or most of these pieces of equipment, are going to plug into here. So this device communicates with the inverter, it communicates with the BMS, it communicates with your solar charge controller, and all of that information is available for you via Bluetooth on your phone or with the VRM. Along with the Serbo is the display. This comes in 5 and 7 inch. So if you don't want to use your phone and you want to just see exactly what's going on via a small display, this will do it. And something really cool about the Serbo is that not only will it manage and monitor all of this power equipment, but you can actually plug in tank level monitors, temperature sensors, and some other pieces of equipment into this. So for instance, if you have freshwater and gray water tanks, you can plug them into this and they will show up on the display. Another thing we like to do is monitor the temperature of our batteries and the temperature of our hot water. And you can use this device also to manage and have all of that information via the app available to you. The final piece of equipment I wanted to talk about, and this is often overlooked, is the digital multi-control. So if you're using a Victron inverter, then you should have a controller that will limit the current of the incoming power. As we said, this is a 30 amp plug, but often if you're plugging into your home outlet, it may only be 15 amps. And this will allow you to dial down the incoming current to 15 amps so that you're not constantly popping your breakers and having to go reset them in order to charge. This device is actually also integrated into the Serbo GX, so really you only need one or the other, but we find to actually have a separate display with manual switches, you're more likely to do the right thing if you're able to quickly do it rather than going through a few menus, which you have to do with this, in order to limit the current on the inverter. Another thing this does is you're able to turn the inverter on and off via this switch, which otherwise you'd have to get to the face of this and use this button. Oftentimes this is kind of hidden away, so when you connect the multi-control to the inverter, you're actually able to turn the inverter on and off remotely, which is a really nice feature. There are also a bunch of cables, different types of cables that come with this system, different things that plug in. All right, so fast forward, the power system has been installed in the van here. So it's time for us to give you guys a walkthrough of what it actually looks like when it gets installed. So the first thing to mention is that we installed the system in the Infinity Power Box, which is a really fabulous way to go because it's designed to fit a power system with all of the wire routing and the mounting points built in. So the power system really should only take a couple days from beginning to end to install when you have something to install it in. If you don't have something to install it in, it can be a little bit of a challenge to build something custom to house the system because it really needs to be super sturdy and give you access to the system as you're using it in the van. All right, so let's take a look. I'm gonna pull off a couple doors here just to give you guys an idea of what it looks like. Yeah. Come on in, let's take a look. The first thing I'll mention is that This system that we've spec'd out here would work equally well in a 144 or a 170 van. It's just a matter of how much space that you have for battery storage. So this van here has 600 amp hours. There is enough room to add another 200 amp hours for 800 total. In the 144, typically you're gonna be able to do 400 amp hours, and if you get creative, sometimes you can squeeze in another battery. And we always mount these as low as possible, just to keep the center of gravity in the van low. It's really important to have good brackets to hold the batteries in place. Obviously, if they're moving around, the connections can loosen. You definitely don't want that to happen. So good bracketing is very important on those. And moving up into the main components, we have the Lynx BMS, which is connected to the batteries, and that is the main control center where it's reading the power that's going in and out, and then also keeping the batteries from getting damaged by a number of different features that it has in it. Connected to the BMS is the Lynx distributor. So once you have power coming into the BMS, it gets distributed through the distribution panel, and there's 4 fuses in that. Each of those would run to its own set of components. So for instance, we would have one running to all of the DC loads that are coming off of the control panel. Secondly, the air conditioner has its own dedicated fuse off of the Lynx distributor. And then finally, the inverter, really important because that consumes a lot of energy. It also has its own fuse off of the distributor. Last piece of equipment in here is the solar smart controller. We have 200 watts of solar on the van, so the 30 amp solar charge controller is going to be enough to manage that. So as you can see, power systems, a lot of people think they are complicated and can be very intimidating. So one of the ways that we kind of overcome that is to do really clean installations. That way the client, when they go to look in here, they're not afraid of what they're looking at, and if they need to do a little bit of troubleshooting, it's really clear what everything is and where everything goes. A big part of that is obviously having access to it. You need to be able to see. I don't really like to bury power systems in boxes that you'll never get into again. And then the second thing is wire management. I think the biggest issue with power systems that don't look good or don't function well is the wire management is just not at the level that it could be. All right, something to mention here. You may notice in this system, we're using the Lynx Smart BMS, whereas when we were at the table, we suggested using this BMS system for the Victron batteries. And the difference is if you're using your factory alternator for charging, this is the BMS we'd recommend. It limits the current to 30 amps, which helps protect your alternator. But if you're getting a high output alternator like this van does, then you would actually switch over to the Lynx BMS, which is a better BMS for that type of scenario. We actually did a video on the high output alternator that was installed on one of our vans. So you can check out the video here if you haven't seen it and get an idea of what the high output alternator does and when you would want to use it. So just know that we actually have this system on our website, and you would select whether you're using the factory alternator or an aftermarket alternator, and then we would just send you the appropriate equipment based on what your use case is going to be. This is the main part of the power system. Let's go up into the cabinet there, and we can show you the inverter. In this rear part of the cabinet, we've installed the Victron inverter. This is the MultiPlus 3000. And it manages all of the charging from shore power and then also the AC power generation and distribution through the van. We have a couple of breakers here. These are incoming power. You have one from the solar and one from the alternator so that any power that's coming into the system can easily be isolated. And then of course they're also breakers, so if there was an overheat or short in the line, that would trip there. Finally, we have the Serbo GX, and this is the communication device that all of the other equipment can plug into and allows you to, first of all, connect to this display, and secondly, view all of the data that the system is generating both on your phone and online. And finally, we have the back of the power panel here. These are the external devices that you need to have regular access to, so they're all mounted on the outside for easy access. First of all, the master on-off switch is located there. We have the AC breakers here. There's 2 AC circuits in the van, so each of these controls one of them. A 110 volt outlet with USB and USB-C built into it. Finally, we have the GX display. This is connected to the Serbo GX. So all the information from all of these components that we just showed you is available right here on the display. It's great to be able to see really everything that's going on. And there's so many times when this system has helped me diagnose problems that otherwise would have been a real trick to figure out. One final piece of equipment to show you guys, which is our shore power connection. This is where you can plug into grid power and charge up your batteries, or really run the entire van off of AC power when it's available. In a few minutes, we're actually going to show you guys how to properly charge your batteries, which is something I don't think really gets talked about very much. So stick around for that. But first, I wanted to answer a couple questions that you guys have about Victron systems and why we use them exclusively. I think most people know Victron is really high quality equipment, but it's definitely not the cheapest equipment out there, especially when it comes to the batteries. So why would we use all Victron and not use some cheaper pieces of equipment where we could? Reason number one that we use all Victron is because it's just simpler to buy everything from a single manufacturer. And when you're going to purchase, there's certain data cables that are needed and other connections that it really makes it easiest if whoever designed the equipment thought about that from the beginning and you don't have to retrofit it later. The second reason we use all Victron is because everything just works together and we're able to see into each of the pieces of equipment via the Bluetooth or the display and get a sense of what might be going on with the system, if we're having a problem, or if we just want to understand what the state of our batteries is. If you're using equipment that does not all connect together, then some of it is kind of in the dark and you really don't know what's going on, except for doing some basic electrical tests that will definitely take a lot longer and may not solve the problem. Reason number three that we use all Victron, and probably the biggest reason, is because of the VRM, which is the Victron Remote Management System. And so actually, let's just jump onto the computer and I'll show you guys what that looks like. All right, so let's go ahead and log into the VRM and I'll show you guys what this is all about. And here we have it. We actually have real-time data of what's going on with the system. So this is kind of the dashboard, which shows, probably most importantly for me, the batteries, the inverter, and the solar. Those are the main things that I want to look at here. So the battery, for instance, current voltage is 13 volts. There's a draw of 1.5 amps, and we have 240 hours to go at this rate. Within the VRM system, there's a lot more than we can talk about during this video, but I'll just give you a quick glance at some of the things that you can see. So right now, for instance, we have the system overview over the past 7 days. The red bars being consumption. The blue kind of cloud is the battery levels for that day. And then yellow is solar. So you can actually see here the van has been inside the shop for like the past 5 days. And so we really haven't gotten much solar gain, but there is a little bit a few days ago. And then right now it's out in the sun, so it's going to be collecting solar. You can actually see that right here, 62 watts of power coming in from the solar panels. We can also switch over to a consumption graph. This just gives us an idea of what's been using power over the past several days or weeks. And then finally, solar. Again, so you can see here, for about the past 5 days, no solar gain, but we have the van out right now. If you want more data, you can go into the Advanced tab. And this gives you a number of different charts to look at, and you can actually customize this based on what type of information that you're interested in seeing. So I always look at my batteries first. So right now I can see that I'm at 13 volts, I'm using 91 watts. Current state of charge is 97%. The next one here is a graph of the state of charge over the past several days. So we got all the way down to 14.5% at one point, but right now the batteries are mostly charged. And it just goes on and on. We can look at the inverter. We can look at any of the warnings and alarms that that the inverter has thrown, which is super useful. And then down towards the bottom here, we have a bunch of information about the solar gain that we're getting. One of the other things I want to show you is the alarm log. So if you look back, several of the pieces of equipment will have alarms if there's a problem. And one of the really neat things is you can just go into the alarm log and look at a recent alarm, click on it, and then it will actually display the graphs of what was happening right at the time that you had the alarm. So this just gives you some insight into basically what the problem might have been. Right now, I do know that this low voltage alarm was due to the fact that I had turned on the system while there were a bunch of accessories kind of ready to turn on. And the BMS shut down the system briefly and gave me a warning that said, turn off some of your power demands and then restart the system. And I did, and it came back up. It's just one of those things where if you have this guidance, then it's much more likely you'll be able to solve a problem rather than just having a multimeter and testing different spots. It's not impossible, but the degree of difficulty between having the VRM system and just troubleshooting it on your own is many times harder. Okay, so the last thing I want to show you, in this is common for us because we're actually building systems for people and then they're taking them out on their trips. They may not have the same level of knowledge about power systems or understand which of the components are which to the level that we do. So something we're able to do is upload photos of the system into the VRM, and both the client and us could look at these photos together. If we're trying to troubleshoot something and maybe we need them to check to see if a wire is loose, we can literally just point right to the component on these photos and then have some degree of communication with them about what's what. Hopefully that gives you an idea of why we like this piece of equipment, why we would recommend it to most people. So if you guys have any questions, leave them in the comments and we'll try to get them answered. Once you have your system completely installed and you're using it every day, something to keep in mind is how to properly charge your batteries. And I think it's something that's really not talked about enough in the industry. My recommendations for charging your batteries are make sure you charge your batteries up completely at least once a month, and ideally also before every big trip you're going to take. So as we know, a battery system like this is going to get power from the solar charger, the alternator, and then also from shore power. And the number one best way to charge is via shore power if you want to top up your batteries and make sure that they have a perfect charge. And the reason that is just because from charging from solar and charging from the alternator, the currents are fluctuating. For solar panels, if the sun is out and then it goes cloudy, the solar charger cannot maintain a level of charging that's ideal for charging the batteries. And the same thing goes with the alternator charger. The alternator charge fluctuates, and if it's in the middle of a charging cycle and you shut the van off, it's not going to basically ideally charge the batteries the way it would with shore power. So at least once a month and before every trip, plug the batteries into shore power overnight, and that will give you the best charge. So once you plug into shore power, you can expect it to take between potentially 6 and 10 hours for your batteries to charge up completely. Of course, that depends on how much battery storage you have. But the best thing to do, I believe, is to just plug it in overnight, and that in the morning when you get up and you get ready for your trip, your batteries will be completely topped up. So one of the cool things about the Victron system is that I can actually Bluetooth connect to each of the 3 batteries that are in here and see the voltage, not only of the battery in total, but each of the cells, which each one contains 4 cells, and then the state of balance of them. So it will tell you whether or not each of the batteries is balanced, and that's what the overnight charging does. It goes through the bulk stage and the absorption stage and the float stage of charging, and then when that happens, basically each of the cells gets supercharged up to its maximum capacity, and then all of the cells get balanced, and then you have your battery working at the optimal capacity. If you want a system like this in your van, we have it bundled as a complete power system on our website. It includes all of the components plus all of the cables and wires that you need to get a full lithium power system like this into your van. So, all right, everybody, thank you so much for watching the power system walkthrough, and we will see you guys again next time.